Hello, welcome to the product installation video of the Z31 rear suspension kit. Now, this will be a hybrid video. We're gonna do the best to explain it in depth as much as we can, as well as pre-assemble as much as we can on the table here. The reason it's gonna be a hybrid video is one, the customer's car already has our full rear suspension as it is in a different color on the car right now. We didn't really want to take all that off, put it back on, because we're going to be taking it off again for document for a new iteration of our Z31 rear suspension kit that will be actually very different than the trailing arm style that you see here, and it's going to be a full multi-link style 240SX style suspension kit with a tubular subframe, adjustable arms, that would host a 370Z differential or the Super 8.8 differential, as well as those bearings from a 370Z. So we are going to try to do our best to explain it as much as we can, both on the table here and with this current kit. And we hope that you understand it enough. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or call us. We do apologize that this isn't the most in-depth video that we try to make for these, but this will at least be a solid video for a very good fundamental understanding on the installation process. And it should get you all the questions answered, as well as visually seeing how it is already on the car. You just won't seeing the parts actually get put onto the car. So without further ado, we're gonna go over everything that's included. The crossmember with the polyurethane bushings, the trailing arms with the bearings installed, and the bolts for the brackets already installed as well. The rear suspension kit hardware consists of the following. You're gonna have 4 of these carriage bolts. These are gonna go on for the sway bar. You're gonna have 4 of the washer. Those are also for the carriage bolts, and 4 of the nuts. Those are also for the carriage bolts. Then you're gonna have a stack of washers. Those are gonna be in here, as well as in here. And you have these misalignment spacers. The misalignment spacers, those will all go onto the bearings like so. Then you're gonna have a set of 4 of the long bolts and 4 of the shorter bolts. The long bolts will go to mount your actual differential, and the shorter bolts will actually go to mount the trailing arm to the crossmember. And then you'll have 2 sets of 4 of the nylon lock nuts. Again, 4 are gonna be for the trailing arm to crossmember and 4 for the differential. So now we're gonna do a little bit of pre-assembly. I'm gonna try to pre-assemble as much as I can on the table here so you can see how it all goes together. We're not gonna tighten the nuts down necessarily, because we're gonna take this all apart eventually, and unless a customer wants to buy the gray exactly like the way it is. But this way we'll have a good understanding of how it gets all assembled off the car, and then we're gonna go take a look at how it is installed on the car. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is install the sway bar bolts. Obviously there's no sway bar, so I'm not gonna do the full install, but these would essentially just get bolted into the brackets down here. And they're square, so it makes it so you don't have to have a second set of hands holding the wrench. You'll pop these in, you'll have the sway bar bracket, and then followed by the washer and the nut, and you tighten those up. We're gonna go ahead and put in the misalignment spacers for these. Now, a good rule of thumb to figure out which option you want to have selected on your ride height is generally start at factory, which is the lowest on the inner mount and the second from the top on the outer mount. From there, you can go lower, you can go higher. If you're trying to pull out camber, you can make the outer mount all the way to the bottom, and you're still trying to get that extra bit, you can move this to the top. That'll be the least amount of camber you can put into the car, which I know that is a big popular option. So then the first thing after you got those misalignment spacers in, it's a bolt and a washer. And I'm gonna slide this onto the chassis. And then with that bolt through, you're gonna put a washer on the backside as well as that nut. We're gonna do the same thing to the outer side. So I'm gonna grab a bolt, 2 washers, and a nut. Put the washer on the bolt head. And then if there's gaps, which generally there has to be in order to accommodate for all the variations of articulation, you can space the gap with a washer. Now, if you're going off the most factory setup, you'll only have 1 washer's gap, which would be in the middle in here. Now, if you're gonna alter it even more, because this stays the same, that's why we have to supply the washers to accommodate for the differences, because these do not move left or right. So then, once you have those bolted up, you're gonna do the same thing to the other side. You're gonna wanna keep them loose if you do it on a table. You're more than welcome to install the crossmember first and then install the trailing arms onto the car. It'll be a lot lighter to do it that way, but because we'll have many people here able to help, we tend to do this more on the table and then just bring it all to the car as an assembly. Now, part of the trailing arm process, I guess I should have mentioned before actually bolting it onto the trailing arm, is pressing in the bearings themselves. Now, these just reuse the factory Z31, 86 and older bearings that you would just press on. You'd make sure you have that middle sleeve when you go pressing the stub axles, and that's really about it. It's just the same fundamental of pressing in the bearing and pressing out the bearing that you would do in the factory trailing arms. That would carry out this. Then once you have those installed, I just wanted to quickly show you off the car how the adjuster works. Here you can see if I turn it one way, it brings this narrower. But if I turn it the other way, it turns both the rod end as well as the trailing arm. And so I'm able to easily adjust toe without having to unbolt anything, just like that. Pretty neat. If I did it with both of them, I'm able to adjust my caster with the full control arm remove, and then choosing the holes, I'm able to adjust your camber. So I'm gonna do that to both sides. And that's where we're gonna stop when it turns to the installation on the table. We'll go through the torque specs and everything in a little bit, but this is relatively basic. Obviously, you would have your bearings and trailing arm bearings on there, but then we're gonna run over to the car and show you it already installed and walk you through the process of the torque specs and all that onto the car. So we'll see you at the car. Now that we're on the car, you can see that's already installed as discussed. Now we're gonna walk you through the way of we're gonna have these installed. So now that you have the bolts here, and you can see he actually opted for the top hole on the inside and still kept it on the one from the top on the outside. But regardless, that was his camber settings. You know, if you wanted to reduce it more or whatever, you can change it as is. Now, we're gonna go over how we have these items bolted. So generally, when it comes to the differential side of it, here you can see we have a bolt, a washer, and then the differential, then the washer and the bolt, and the nut, sorry. So you would take the long bolt, you'd have the washer, you'd slide it up, and then go through the differential, and then on the top of the differential, have the washer, have the nut. This way, it's easily accessible. If you had the bolt going this way, there's no way to pull it out. So if you ever had to pull the diff or something and you really don't want to pull the whole suspension, you can do that. Then when it comes to the mounting of the trailing arm, as discussed, how we did it on the table, that's how we mounted the trailing arms here. As well as here you can see that the bolt that we supply to have this coilover bracket that is on the factory trailing arm. We have the bolt that you would just reuse, the ones that comes with our trailing arm, and then you would reuse your bolt that goes from the original bracket and the original trailing arm. You just reuse that onto our trailing arm, the length of which is fine. And then obviously the bolt that holds the coilover, you would just reuse that as well. You can see here, he just bolted up the hubs from his Z31, they pressed in, he just bolted up the axles. All the bolting and the bearings and the pressing and all that should be referred to the factory OEM manual. Now, you can see that the sway bar is already attached. These were the carriage bolts on the bottom. He had the carriage bolt from the top, the bracket, washer, and the nut, and was able to have this nicely tightened up in there. And then when it came to the link, because we opt for two holes depending on how much caster you add. We have another hole here if you made these much longer, but obviously he didn't, so he kept the outside, or the hole closest to my finger here, and then mounted the sway bar link. You can use the sway bars manufacturer or the OEM manufacturer, depending what sway bars you have. Eventually, if we do create our own sway bars, we'll have our own torque specs and all that. That should cover you to understand the fundamentals on how the suspension essentially gets bolted in together. You would reuse this bracket that we have here. You would reuse this large washer that's on the top here. We just loosened it up, that's why it's wiggly. And then the bracket and the bolts and all that. That sums up the install. now we're gonna go over the torque specs of everything. You're going to torque the rear bolt for the crossmember and those bolts for the brackets. Those are gonna be OEM as well. We're gonna go through all the OEM stuff first. Sway bar, if you're running an OEM sway bar, then the OEM torque specs. Otherwise, if you're running a aftermarket sway bar, whoever's aftermarket you go with. Generally on the poly, they usually don't supply torque specs, and it's just because you want to squish the poly. That's really about it. You don't want to have the poly be so squished or sandwiched, and you don't want to be too loose. It's generally, it feels sort of thing. When it comes to the torque specs of all the hubs and all that, that's as well, same as factory, axle. And then when it comes to our specific products, the crossmember, the trailing arm, mounting surfaces, these right here are gonna be 20 to 25 foot-pounds. The diff to the crossmember is gonna be 30 to 35 foot-pounds. Jam nuts, you're gonna wanna make sure that they're tight. The bolts for the trailing arms is about 15 to 20 foot-pounds is what we recommend on these. Anything excess that really doesn't have any additional strength or force that you're able to put in. A critical part of these is when it comes to the trailing arms double adjust. And a reason why, a few years back, we had a customer's trailing arm shear right here is because they overextended the tie rod, or the rod end on it. A rule of thumb is 1.5 times of thread diameter, or diameter of the thread or shank or whatever, shank diameter of engaged thread. That does not mean jam nut thread. That means actually engage into what you need it to be. And so when you overextend past that, then the only thing holding on is this actual bung adjuster nut. Now the bung adjuster nut has an inside thread and an outside thread, and it's not meant to take forces and shear because it's assuming you have the rod end in the middle, because the rod end's the strength part. The adjuster nut is just the convenience to adjust. So the critical part is, like you can see here, he has a good amount of thread engagement. He only has about 1/4 inch or 1/4 inch of exposed thread. So assuming that this is a 3/4 inch shank, he has about 1/2 inch of exposed, past the adjuster, and as we're saying, the jam nut doesn't count. And so 1.5 times the 3/4 should be of engaged thread in the adjuster. And then the adjuster has the same aspect. That's a 1 inch diameter thread. And so you should have at least 1.5 inches of engaged thread. If you need to go past that, let's say your caster needs to go longer, reach out to us and we'll supply you with extra long shanked rod ends. So then you don't do that, because when improperly used, you're not having much of thread engagement, and that's when you can cause a shear to happen. This would not happen if it was engaged properly, but that's something to note of and consider when purchasing the kit. Is if you want to add more caster, and as you're doing the caster, you might want to say, oh yeah, I need these extra long shanks. No problem, we can get those sent out to you. But that in its essence is pretty much the overall installation video. You can see here Kyle's Z31, he actually has Z32 calipers on it, as well as Z32 brakes. So you can opt for the Z32 brakes, which are the pretty common swap, especially for the performance Z31 setup. But that's really about it. We do apologize for not having a full installation video of having this. I think just the convenience aspect for us to not having to take it on and off so many times just makes it a lot easier, and that way we can get the new products tried and tested. But if you have questions on this, shoot us an email, give us a call, let us know. But overall, we thank you for watching. If you have any questions or concerns, call us, shoot us an email. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.